The morning sunlight hit the cracked pavement of Maplewood Street as little Sophie Renner, just 7 years old, clutched the straps of her faded pink backpack and looked nervously down the road toward her school. The laughter of other children echoed in the distance, but none of it belonged to her. Her sneakers scuffed the ground as she hesitated, biting her lip. It wasn't that she didn't want to go to school. She loved learning, loved her teacher, but lately school had become something else entirely. A place of whispers, a place of cruel laughter, a place where she felt small. Every step toward that building felt like walking into a storm she couldn't escape. Her mother, Laura Renner, watched from the porch, her heart aching. Laura was a single mom, working double shifts at the diner just to keep the lights on. She'd tried everything, talking to the school, calling meetings, writing letters. But the bullying never stopped. The kids made fun of Sophie's worn-out shoes, her homemade lunches, her second-hand clothes. But the worst of it came from a group of older kids who liked to corner her on her walk to school. Laura had once found Sophie sitting under a tree, crying so hard she could barely breathe. That night, Laura had held her daughter close and whispered, "You're brave, baby. You're strong. Tomorrow will be better." But tomorrow hadn't been better. And that's when Sophie, in her innocent, trembling voice, said something that would change their entire town forever. "Mom," she asked one morning, her eyes wide and hopeful, "what if someone walked me to school? Someone scary enough to keep them away?" Laura smiled weakly, trying to comfort her, but before she could reply, the rumble of engines filled the air. Down the street, a group of leather-clad bikers pulled into Rusty's garage, the small motorcycle shop across from their house. The leader, a tall, broad man with a gray beard and a vest that read, "Ironheart's MC," took off his helmet. His name was Mason Grizz Tanner, a man with a past no one talked about much but a quiet kindness in his eyes that few noticed. And that's when Sophie had an idea. 2. If you believe in kindness, courage and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Journal. These stories exist to remind us that compassion still changes lives. That afternoon, Sophie walked over to the garage, her small figure dwarfed by the rows of gleaming motorcycles. Her mother watched in nervous disbelief from the porch as Sophie marched up to the group of men. Her little voice trembled, but she stood tall. "Excuse me, mister," she said to Mason, who turned around surprised. "Would you and your friends walk me to school tomorrow? I get scared on the way." The entire garage went silent. Mason blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. His buddies, rough-looking men with tattoos, bandanas, and steel-toed boots, exchanged glances. Then Mason knelt down so he was eye level with her. "Why do you get scared, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "Because some kids push me and call me names," Sophie said, her voice breaking. "They say mean things about my mom. I just want to walk to school without crying." Mason's face softened. He looked over at Laura, who was standing frozen on the porch, unsure whether to be horrified or grateful. Mason gave her a reassuring nod. "You got yourself a deal, little one," he said quietly. "Tomorrow morning, we'll walk you to school." The next day, Maplewood Street witnessed something it had never seen before. At exactly 7:45 a.m., 12 motorcycles lined up outside the Renner house. Engines off, leather jackets gleaming in the sun, the men stood beside their bikes like silent guardians. Sophie stepped out, her pink backpack glimmering with tiny sequins, her hair tied in 2 small braids. Mason took her hand gently, and the rest of the bikers fell into formation around her. As they began their slow walk toward Maplewood Elementary, curtains opened across the neighborhood. People peeked out of windows. Cars slowed down, and up ahead the same kids who had laughed at Sophie fell silent. The sight of a 7-year-old girl being escorted by a dozen bikers, each one tall, strong, and stone-faced, was something no one could ignore. When they reached the school gate, Mason knelt down again. "You got this," he said, smiling. "We'll be here when you come out." Sophie nodded, her eyes shining for the first time in weeks. She walked through those doors, and for the first time, no one laughed. Over the next few days, the story spread. Parents whispered, teachers smiled, and even the principal stood outside just to see it happen again. Every morning, the Ironheart's MC lined up and walked Sophie to school, and every afternoon they were waiting when the final bell rang. The bullies disappeared. The laughter changed. Sophie began smiling again. But what no one knew was how much this act of kindness changed them too. Mason had lost his daughter in a car accident 5 years earlier. She would have been around Sophie's age now. The pain of that loss had driven him to silence, then to the road, where the roar of his bike was the only thing that could drown out the noise in his heart. He'd spent years believing he didn't deserve to protect anyone again. But every time Sophie looked up at him with trust in her eyes, something inside him healed. The other bikers, men who had been labeled as troublemakers or outcasts, found a purpose they hadn't felt in years. They started cleaning the park near the school, fixing kids' bikes for free, donating notebooks and pencils. The Iron Hearts became known as the Guardian Riders. Parents began waving at them. Shop owners offered discounts, and the local newspaper ran the headline, "Bikers protect little girl from bullies, community inspired by unexpected heroes." The story went viral. Reporters came, cameras flashed, but Mason always said the same thing: "We didn't do it for fame. We did it for Sophie. Because every kid deserves to feel safe." Weeks turned into months, and Sophie's confidence bloomed. She no longer walked with her head down. She began drawing again, pictures of motorcycles and angels, of herself standing tall beside a group of smiling men. One day she gave Mason a drawing that said, "My guardian angels on wheels." Mason couldn't hold back his tears. None of them could. Then one Friday morning, something extraordinary happened. The principal called an assembly. Sophie, nervous but proud, walked up to the stage holding a small envelope. Mason and the other bikers were seated in the back row, their vests shining under the auditorium lights. The principal handed Sophie the microphone, and in her soft, trembling voice, she said, "I used to be scared to come to school. But then some people who everyone thought were scary showed me what real kindness looks like. They walked me here every day, and now I know there are good people everywhere." She handed Mason the envelope. Inside was a hand-drawn certificate with gold glitter on the edges. It read, "Honorary Guardians of Maplewood Elementary, for protecting what matters most." The entire room erupted in applause. Even the teachers were crying. Mason stood, lifted Sophie into his arms, and whispered, "You're the brave one, kid. You changed us." From that day on, the Guardian Riders expanded their mission. They started a community program called Safe Steps, where volunteers, bikers, veterans, and parents alike walked local kids to school every morning. The initiative spread across nearby towns, then across the state. Soon, children everywhere were walking hand in hand with people once judged by their appearances, but now known as heroes. Months later, as winter snow blanketed Maplewood, Sophie still waved from her porch every morning as Mason's bike pulled up. But this time she wasn't scared anymore. She was laughing, twirling, and ready to take on the world. And one evening, as the sun set behind the old oak trees, Mason stopped by the diner where Laura worked. He placed a worn patch on the counter, the one from his vest that read Iron Hearts MC. "It's time we gave this to someone new," he said. Laura looked confused. "To who?" He smiled. "To Sophie, because she's got the biggest heart of all." Laura pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mason leaned back, his voice quiet but steady. "She didn't just ask for help," he said. "She gave us a reason to be better men." Outside, the town lights flickered on, glowing against the winter sky. And as Mason rode off, his motorcycle's headlights carving through the dusk, the sound no longer felt like thunder. It felt like hope. If this story touched your heart, please don't scroll away. Like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Journal to keep these true acts of compassion alive. Comment below, what would you do if you saw a child walking alone scared? Sometimes, even a small gesture can change a life forever. True moral kindness doesn't always wear a suit or a smile. Sometimes, it rides on two wheels and shows up when you least expect it.